Well, the KNP Complex and the Windy Fire do remain as the most active wildfires in California. The Caldor Fire appears to have flared back up again, and there's the possibility of another big rainstorm coming in for Northern California. So we have a lot to talk about throughout the course of this video. I'm going to give you guys all the most recent updated information on the various wildfires going on in California, and then we're really going to dive into the fire weather forecast to see what these wildfires might do in the days ahead. And then I'll give you a sneak peek of that possible rain event coming in towards the start of next week. But just looking at the satellite imagery here, you can get an idea of a lot of the big stories that we're going to be talking about. First thing that your eyes probably go to is the Windy Fire and the KNP Complex down towards the bottom right of the screen. You can see those large smoke plumes coming off of those fires today. Even looks like a pyrocumulus cloud at one point coming off of the Windy Fire. I'll show that in a live cam in just a second, but first I do want to point out, can't see right there because it's covered with clouds, but that smoke plume coming off of the Caldor Fire. That's not something that we were seeing in previous days. In previous days, you couldn't see any smoke coming off of the Caldor Fire. It wasn't wrapped up. There was certainly still those smoldering areas, but with some gusty winds that we had over the last couple of days, and especially this afternoon, we are seeing more activity on the Caldor Fire than we have been seeing in previous days. But overall, looking at Northern California, I would say pretty good sight right there. Ever since that rainstorm came through a number of days ago, brought about an inch of rain to some of those key fires in northwestern California, like the McCash, the River Complex, and the Monument Fire, even a little rain for the Dixie too. Ever since that happened, Northern California has looked just about as good as it's looked since wildfire season began. And the good news moving forward is it looks like rainstorm number 2 of fall is on its way towards the start of this next week. But with all that being said, let's dive into the most active wildfires in California, the Windy Fire and the KNP Complex down here. So you can clearly see how much smoke is coming off of those fires throughout the day today. And if we really want to get an idea of how active they are, two things we can do. One, we can look at the natural color fire here to see how bright these fires appear to be. Just in that first frame, it looks like the Windy Fire was already fairly active earlier today. And then you'll see as the winds pick up this afternoon, as the relative humidity starts to drop down, you notice how much more active those fires become. And in the last half hour to an hour, we've seen the smoke clear on the northern edge of the KNP complex, and that's allowing things to really start to flare up there, but it looks like the Windy was the more active wildfire throughout the day today. So because of that, we can take a look at what the Windy Fire actually looked like based on the camera that shows a time lapse of the last 6 hours. You can see that one plume coming up right here, and then you start to notice some of those pyrocumulus clouds popping up as that smoke that somewhat calms the fire down earlier in the day. Once that moves out, that allows the sunlight to heat up the fuels a lot more, gets a lot drier, and then that's where you start to see those pyrocumulus clouds start to pop up. So as you can see, Windy Fire did remain fairly active throughout the day today, and whenever I see those pyrocumulus clouds, what that just tells me is right there where you see that puff right there and it looks like the more whitish color on the cloud. Whenever that happens, you know that's where you're seeing some very active fire behavior. And the other thing I always think about is with all that rising motion, that air has to come from somewhere. So that air from the surface rises up, and you can't just have a vacuum at the surface, so then you have to have winds filling the place of that air that just rose, and that's where you can get some very gusty, erratic winds on the surface, which leads to even more fire growth as you move forward. So as you can see, Windy Fire was our most active wildfire throughout the day today. Another way to see that is by looking at the hotspot map. So we can zoom on in here. We'll look at the Windy Fire first, where you can see those yellow dots. Right, if you look at the red shaded area, that's the previous fire perimeter. If you look at those little dots right there, that shows where more of the activity has been recently. And the key thing I always look at on this map is if you have those dots outside of the previous fire perimeter, that means the fire is continuing to grow. And it looks like it's been continuing to grow in a couple of key areas. looks like where you see those yellow dots, that represents where the fire was seeing a lot of heat being picked up by the satellites on that eastern edge right there. And then you can also see that southern edge as well has a lot of those dots outside of the previous fire perimeter. And I do know that southwestern edge in particular has been creating some problems for firefighters in this area, mainly due to the spot fires that we've been getting. So you can imagine this is actually a perfect example of one. If you have the major fire right here, you got maybe some northeast winds blowing in, picks up some burning embers, throws them out, in some cases ahead of previous containment lines, starts new little fires there, and then you have to start to try and contain those as well. I do know spot fires have been a problem on the southwestern edge, but they do have a number of crews in there that are currently working on it, and I did also hear that they're on the southern edge, they're starting to try to use direct attack to keep this fire in line. So overall, windy fire, you can certainly see how active it looks based on how bright some of those hotspots look. And again, you can always take this hotspot data somewhat with a grain of salt because it is satellites picking up these heat signatures from space. So certainly not going to be perfect, but it is some of the most up-to-date information that we have to work with, where you can't just go off of the previous fire perimeter because we've seen growth throughout the day and they haven't remapped that perimeter yet. So when we look at the KNP complex, you can see pretty similar story where lots of hotspots outside of the previous fire perimeter. Looks like especially on that western edge and that northern edge as well. That was something I was talking about earlier in the video, where in the early morning hours, a lot of that smoke has settled down to the surface, and that actually helps to calm fire behavior down because the sunlight can't get through, so it remains cooler, which means typically your relative humidity will remain higher, but even more importantly, it helps to keep your winds down as well. But then what happened this afternoon was some of that smoke cleared out, and that northern edge of the fire did really start to flare up as that smoke cleared out, as the ground was able to heat up, as our fuels dried out even more than they already are, and we started to see more activity on that northern edge. We might even be able to see that better if we look at this map, where we're actually able to look at the live ghost detection. So this also just gives you a good idea of where that activity has been. Paints a pretty similar story to what we were just looking at. If you look at the red dots around the fire perimeter, that shows where the more recent growth has been on the windy and the KNP complex. Again, on the windy, looks like it's been that eastern edge, southern and southwestern areas where we've seen a lot of that growth recently. And then on the KNP complex, it's more the western and northern edge, and especially that northern edge, which had that smoke inversion clear out throughout the day today. So now we can zoom into windy and then look at the live ghost detections. Now, as always, before I click this, I will remind you that you can take this with a grain of salt. Usually these ghost detections overestimate how much fire we're actually seeing, but it is the most current information that we have to go off. So it does give us a good idea of the general direction that the fire is moving right now. So if we look at the ghost directions, you'll notice that a lot of that heat activity appears to be on that southwestern edge. You notice where you see those red dots, that's where the satellite's picking up the largest amount of heat, but even more heat on that northwestern section than we were previously seeing on the fire perimeter. So seems like that's a similar story to the KNP complex throughout the day today. A lot of heat coming off of that northern edge, but continued growth on that southwestern edge as well. So I think those are going to be some of the key areas that we have to watch as we move forward. If we go up to the KNP complex and look at the live ghost detections, paints a very similar picture to what we were looking at on the previous hotspots. You can see most of that activity on the western edge there, and then starting to see that northern edge flare up over the last half hour to the last hour. But overall, those do remain the two most active spots that we see in California. If we were to zoom out here, you'll notice that nowhere else do you see that many hotspots, which is great news, especially up here in Northern California, where that rainstorm really helped us out in calming down a lot of the fires in those areas. But again, just zooming back into these fires, the key thing that I do want to point out, you've most likely heard about the threat to some of the giant sequoias in this area. I did see one report that they've officially sent out some damage assessment teams to see how those giant sequoias have fared with the fires. So not going to talk about that too much throughout this video, because I think the real information about those giant sequoias will be coming back to us over the next 24 hours. So you'll have to subscribe and stay tuned to hear about that. But what I do like to always look at is where we have the largest amount of structures in these areas. So clicking on the structures right there, you can see them with those orange flashing dots right there. Again, the key spots that we have to worry about on the windy fire are towards the north, northeast, and then also that cluster of structures to the west right there. So just zooming in there, you can see there are a number of areas where we do have some structures around the windy fire, and if we actually want to see some of those city names that we're talking about, Johnsondale, Redwood Corral, hopefully I'm saying that right. We have Soda Springs, Tule River Reservation, Camp Nelson, Smith Mill, Quaker Meadow. So those clusters of structures that you see around there, those are some of the key spots that we're looking at, and I imagine there's still a large amount of evacuation orders in place. Again, I purposely don't go over evacuation warnings and orders in these videos because it's always best to get that kind of information straight from the source. Just reduces the possibility for some kind of confusion if a middleman is involved with that. I think the key spot that I'm worried about on the KNP complex, actually two key spots. If we click on those structures right there, you can get an idea of where you see on that northern edge. Let's see if we can see what town that is on this map right here. So on that northern edge, zooming in there, doesn't want to tell us what town that is. But then on this western edge, perhaps that's Potwisha. Definitely not saying that one right, but gave it an attempt. So I think those are the two spots that I'm continuing to watch on the KNP complex as we move forward, on the northern edge and the western edge right there. So overall, on the windy fire, that did remain fairly active today, or I shouldn't use past tense because you can see that it is still fairly active. Had a pyrocumulus cloud coming off of it, so number of structures around that one, so we are going to have to continue to watch this one as we move forward. As of right now, it's at 32,000 acres, or 31,000 acres, and 7% containment. Again, that was updated 6 hours ago. They usually come up with updates around 7 o'clock, so I most likely won't be able to give the updated number for how much growth we saw throughout the day on the windy fire in this video, but if you go to my Twitter account, once those new numbers come in, I will post a post like this where I have the satellite imagery and then all of the recent numbers once those new ones come out, likely around 7 o'clock. So we'll see how much that growth is throughout the day today. I would imagine we get up to maybe 33 or 35,000 acres burn based on how much growth we were seeing throughout the day today. So looking at the total personnel, you can see that's one good sign. It shows that we're up to 1,289 personnel. Not the best at rounding in this video today. So that's great to see. We're over 1,000 personnel at this point. But right here, I think, is the key paragraph if you want to understand why we're seeing so much activity on this fire. Fuels in the fire area range from timber at the higher elevations to brush and grass at the lower elevations. Higher resistance to control due to mortality, heavy dead and down fuel, and very low fuel moisture. So that's something that we're seeing on both the windy fire and the KNP complex. There's a lot of fuels in the area. They're critically dry, and they are in an area where we're seeing about 50% of the states in that exceptional drought category, 90% of the states in that extreme drought category, and that's certainly playing a big factor when it comes to these fires. Lots of fuels at record low fuel moisture levels. So that is also a factor going on with the KNP complex, which you can see is up to 28,000 acres and doesn't show the containment there, which usually means it's still at 0%. we'll have to see if that number gets updated at 7 o'clock again. I'll put that on Twitter once those new numbers come out. Great to see that there's 1,412 personnel on the KNP complex. Looks like every time I reload this page, that number just continues to rise up. So looking at this paragraph, I think this one gives a key idea of why we're seeing some of that activity throughout the day today. So right there, it says another very smoky day over the KNP complex. That's what I was talking about, where in the early morning hours it has that smoke inversion. But then right there, it says despite the smoke, temperatures remain warmed into the upper 60s to upper 80s and humidity dropped into the teens. Winds remain light to moderate today. Another night of little to no recovery expected with mild and dry conditions. So what that means when they say little recovery in the overnight hours, that means it's going to remain dry overnight, which means it'll likely be able to continue overnight, which is why we often wake up with a lot of smoke over those fires in the morning hours. So overall, when it comes to the Windy Fire and the KNP complex, clearly those were our two most active wildfires in California throughout the day today. Big reasons for that: lots of dry fuels in the area, we had some low relative humidity, and some moderate winds. Certainly not those crazy red flag conditions that we were seeing in previous days, but enough to continue to lead to some moderate growth in those areas. Now, while we're on this satellite imagery, the key thing that you might be wondering in this video is, what is that smoke plume coming off of the Caldor Fire? So let's zoom on up to the Caldor Fire to see what exactly is going on there. Because remember, ever since that rainstorm came in, and actually even before that rainstorm came in, Caldor Fire was looking great. We hadn't really seen a smoke plume coming off of it in quite some time. Looked like it was certainly trending in the right direction, but we did get some gusty winds, especially this afternoon, that have led to this area right here flaring up. So right there where you see those red dots, that's where that smoke plume is currently coming off of the Caldor Fire. If we look at the GOES detections, you can see that's where it's still picking up some of that heat in the area. Now, the good news that I will say is if you look at where the fire perimeter is, you can imagine right here, north of Kirkwood, a lot of that fuel has already burnt out. So that's almost a protective barrier between where that hotspot is and Kirkwood, where there's not going to be all that much fuel and energy for those hotspots to actually threaten Kirkwood once again. It's almost like we have a nice little shield right there, and a very similar story for a lot of these structures that we see north of the hotspot. A lot of the fuels in that area have already been cleared out. So the hotspot itself is almost boxed in a little bit, which is some good news when it comes to the fact that that has seemed to have flared up over the last couple of days, but especially this afternoon. So overall with the Caldor Fire, not seeing any big jump in the acreage yet. It's still at about 220,000 acres, but that was updated 7 hours ago, and as you could see on this map, we are seeing some growth throughout the day today. New hotspots popping up with those winds that we've had this afternoon. So it's going to be interesting to see what that number turns into once I, again, do that update tonight on Twitter with all those numbers once they officially come out, which should be in an hour or two. So when it comes to all three of these fires that we're looking at, Windy Fire, KNP Complex, Caldor Fire, what allowed a lot of that growth throughout the day today is we did have some rather strong winds. Again, over the Windy and KNP, it was moderate compared to what we have seen in the past, but I think this right here paints a pretty good picture for why the Caldor Fire was able to flare up throughout the day today. You can see just randomly clicking in there, some gusts up to about 35 miles per hour. But the one good thing in the forecast is if we get into Thursday afternoon, you notice that those winds drop back down to more normal levels where the gusts are just around 20 to 25 miles per hour. So that might make you wonder why we had all these wind gusts today. And it was really because of this little low pressure system and this trough that you see just dip through Oregon real quick. It doesn't really look like all that much, but it was just enough to bring some of those wind gusts to Northern California and especially over the Caldor Fire. You can just see it on this map because, again, where you have those lines very far apart, that's where your winds are going to be relatively weak. You can see over the Windy Fire and KNP Complex, that's where those lines are pretty far apart. But as that trough goes through Oregon, a lot of those lines over Northern California get closer together, and that just means that you're going to have some stronger winds. Again, it's all due to the pressure gradient between those isobars right there. So good news is that trough is a quick mover. It's going to be gone. And then those strong wind gusts that we've had throughout the day today that helped to flare up the Caldor Fire will be gone as well. Now, you might be looking at the fire weather forecast and thinking there is some good and some bad news. So I think right there is a pretty good snapshot of what we have moving in over the next couple of days. It's a much more normal pattern for this time of the year. Big high pressure system, big ridge moving in over California. And with that, you typically get warmer and drier conditions, which you could think would be bad for wildfire because, well, it's getting warmer and drier. But usually when high pressure systems move in, that also means that your winds calm down as well. So I think the fire weather forecast, you can go almost both ways. Main ones I'm going to look at, we'll check out the Windy Fire and the KNP Complex for their forecast. Because those, again, Caldor Fire, it has flared up, but it looks like it's that hotspot's pretty boxed in to where it had burned in the past. And I know they've done a lot of good work up there. I'm knocking on wood right now, but I'm not expecting that to get out of hand by any means. Doesn't look like there's any real red flag conditions coming in the next couple of days, so I think they'll be able to handle that. So do want to just focus on the Windy Fire and the KNP Complex for the forecast ahead. Again, some gusty winds throughout the day today because of that low pressure system that came through Oregon and Northern California. But as we go into tomorrow afternoon, you notice the winds calm down significantly. So that's the good news right there. And it's not actually only good news because of the fact that there's going to be less winds, which means we have less of those spot fires that we're especially seeing over the Windy Fire, especially that southwestern edge throughout the day today. So we'll get less of those spot fires. I just want to show the example of it right there. So that's something that those extreme wind gusts can bring, is where it picks up burning embers, starts little spot fires right there, makes it very challenging for wildland firefighters to keep trying to fight a fire when it keeps spotting over containment lines. So that's where calming winds is a good thing. It basically reduces the ability to pick up those burning embers. Now, the other good thing that calming winds do is it allows that smoke to settle down to the surface. Now, you might not think that is a good thing. Looking at the air quality map, you can see in the legend where that bright red color is, that's that unhealthy air quality. Where that purple color is, that's where the very unhealthy air quality is. You can see most of that smoke being produced by the Windy Fire and the KNP Complex throughout the day today. You just see it blow up and then settle down around this area. So you might not think it's good to have the smoke settle down over an area, but when you do get that smoke over your fires, you can imagine the next day solar radiation and that sunlight trying to break through that smoke, it's diminished. So the temperatures on the ground remain a lot cooler, which then reduces the temperature gradients, which reduces your winds. So it's actually a good thing to see smoke over wildfires because it helps to reduce the behavior over the next couple of days, as those winds will be remaining relatively calm. Now, with that being said, again, with the high pressure system, brings weaker winds, which is a good thing, but should bring some warmer temperatures in. You can see right directly where we put that point on the Windy Fire shows about 77, but just west of there starts to get into the mid 90s, and then humidity right there just shows 20%, but we do know that there are parts of the fire that are remaining in the low teens, and then especially on the KNP Complex, we also see those poor relative humidity recoveries overnight, which allows the fire activity to continue overnight. So number of different factors going on. Overall, I would say the fire weather forecast is looking good because, again, I always think that winds are the number one factor that lead to extreme fire growth, and the fact that we're not seeing any of those red flag type conditions coming in over the next couple of days overall looks like a pretty good sign. And I think that'll especially be a good sign on the Caldor Fire, which was able to flare up throughout the day today with those gustier winds. But if we look at tomorrow afternoon compared to today, those winds will be significantly calming down. So hopefully that flare up will calm down as well. But you may be actually interested in that air quality forecast. So right there, you can see most of the smoke that we're seeing is from the KNP and the windy fire. So we actually want to look at what it's expected to do. For some reason, this website always gives me troubles in my videos. I should maybe just stop using it. Alright, we'll try this one. So you can see that smoke coming off of the Caldor Fire. Unfortunately, we can't see the windy fire and the KNP Complex, which are the ones that are the most interesting to look at. But overall, it looks like for the forecast for tomorrow, it does have less smoke coming off of the Caldor Fire. So that's at least good to see right there. If we could see this one, we would see that tomorrow it's most likely going to be even worse air quality throughout this area because that high pressure system moves in and then that smoke's able to settle down to the surface. Now, you might be wondering what happens after that, and I purposely saved this for the end of the video because I usually have the rule of thumb that I don't trust a weather forecast more than 3 days out, but considering that it is a possible rain event, we are just going to take a quick look at it right now because it is something on the horizon that I think will be a big story that we're talking about as we move forward over the next couple of days. So right there, you can see that high pressure system still over California through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But then as we get into Monday, you start to notice this troughing pattern moving in. And then as we get into Tuesday, it dips right down into Northern California. Now, one thing that I will say is you can see it turns into a cutoff low right there on Wednesday. This is a ways off in the forecast, and I've noticed in the past that whenever there's a cutoff low type system like this, it's one of the things that I think the models have the hardest time forecasting. A lot of times we'll actually end up seeing it pull all the way up into Washington, doesn't dip all the way down, but so take this with a grain of salt. We are going to see these models change over the next few days, but as of right now, it has a rather large trough dipping right down into Northern California. So as that trough dips down, it looks like we have the potential to get our second good rainstorm of fall. And I can't officially say fall because it is officially fall as of today. And right there you can see where that rain is predicted, actually showing a little bit more southern of a push than that first rainstorm that we got, going all the way down to Monterey and the Santa Cruz Mountains. But just like the first rainstorm, most of that rain expected to fall in northwestern parts of California, and actually good to see in northeastern California as well. If we actually want to zoom in and look at what kind of numbers we might be getting as this comes in, look at the timing. So that's Monday at 5 a.m. It looks like it's still off the coast right there, and then it starts to fill in throughout Monday into Tuesday, and right there, looks like it's pretty much done dropping rain on California Wednesday at 5 a.m., and at that point, the models have predicted that we're going to be getting 1 to 2 inches of rain in northwestern California. That'd be great news to just continue the awesome progress we've had on the McCash River Complex and Monument fires ever since that first rainstorm came in. But I'm also really going to be looking forward to the Dixie Fire area and perhaps the Caldor Fire area getting a little bit more rainfall as well, just so we can officially wrap those fires up. So that's something that we're certainly going to be watching as we move forward. Again, to stay updated on this, you can subscribe to this channel where I do these update and forecast videos. I usually try to do them daily, but right now I'm wrapping up my master's thesis, so it's a bit more spotty, but whenever something important comes up, I do make sure to do an update and forecast video, and I am certainly going to be interested to follow this possible rainstorm as it comes in. So again, you can subscribe to this channel to stay updated with all the current California wildfires and any new ones that might pop up, or this possible rain event. And then, as I said earlier in the video, the numbers that we're looking at weren't up to date when it comes to the current acreage. So in about an hour, once those numbers are updated, I'll do another post like this on Twitter. So you can follow me on Twitter to see that post once that does come up. So overall, I hope this video is helpful. I'll be back with more videos as we move forward throughout the wildfire season. Also notice that there are a number of comments in the live chat. My apologies for not looking at any of them. Just wanted to get the information out as fast as possible throughout the day today. And thank you very much, Brenda, for the super chat. And I see you say, how is the thesis going? So, you know, we have a minute here, so we'll just answer that question. Thesis is going very well over the last couple of days. It's really started to come together. If you don't know, what I'm doing for my thesis is basically using machine learning to predict extreme fire days. And one plot that I can show you that I made throughout the day today that's pretty cool. It shows the different fuel types in California. We have grasslands, brush is in that kind of lime green color, and then the forests are in that dark green color. And then all those red dots, that is all the different wildfires that I'm training my machine learning model with. It's thousands of wildfires that I'm using to basically train this model to be able to predict extreme fire days in the future. So that's just a little snapshot of what I'll hopefully be showing more of in the months ahead. Once I do finish up that master's thesis, I will be sure to do a whole video on everything that I found out. And just a little something for people who have stayed on the live chat. I forgot to show this. This is the KNP Complex fire, and this is the WRF-SFIRE model simulation. Again, this is a way higher level than the type of model that I'm building. This is one of the top wildfire models in the entire world. It was actually primarily developed by one of my advisors, Dr. Adam Kochanski. And it basically takes the fuel, weather, topography variables, and the current fire perimeter and hotspots to predict how that fire is going to grow over the next 2 days. And then what really sets this model apart is it's able to predict how the wildfire is going to create its own weather, like what I was talking about earlier, where you get all that rising air, then new winds rush in. This model predicts how that wildfire is going to create its own weather, and then how that weather will then impact the wildfire. So just looking at the forecast for the KNP complex over the next 2 days, again, let's make sure we're looking at, so first it's going to show the forecast for today, and I'd say it did a pretty good job because it's showing a lot of that growth on the northern section there, where that is one of the key spots that we did see growth throughout the day today. And then right down here, you can see it switches to the 23rd. So now this is going to be the forecast for tomorrow. Looks like we start the day with some northerly winds. Could be some of those down canyon winds with that diurnal pattern. And then as we get into the afternoon, or it stops at about 10:45 right there, but you could actually start to see that wind shift start to come in, where we'd start to get more growth on the north there. So just going back and forth, looks like the model is predicting more growth on that eastern edge right there, but then also that northern edge as well. So some of the key spots that we are going to continue to follow on the KNP complex fire. So overall, I hope this video was helpful. Again, you can subscribe for more videos like this, and you can also follow me on Twitter, where I'll update all these numbers once they come out in about an hour. So hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.